Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. If you own a Vespa, go to ScooterWest.com. We have every part, every accessory, anything you need for your modern vintage Vespa. So today, back to basics. An oil change on a Vespa GTS. So this all applies whether you have a 2006 GT200 all the way up to the very last GTS with the regular 300 motor, 278 motor, up to about 2019. You can watch some of my videos on the HPE specific oil change, a little bit different. Check those out. But pretty much the same stats for all those years. So about 13 years of the Vespa GT range, and kind of applies to all the other Vespas and Piaggios that are 4-stroke as well for the most part, whether it's an LX, ET4, a Piaggio Fly. So enough of me talking, let's get right to it. So an oil change on a Vespa is due at first at 1,000 kilometers, which corresponds to 625 miles. There's a break-in oil change. There's much more than just an oil change. I get that comment all the time. I just want an oil change. Well, scooters have a little bit more service needs than just basic oil changes. And then thereafter, every 6,000 miles or about 10,000 kilometers, my recommendation is cut that interval in half, especially if you're on the highway with the scooter. You know, change the oil every 3,000 miles. So we're gonna change the oil and oil filter. All right, let me start with the materials needed. You're gonna need 5W40 full synthetic oil. This is the motorcycle specific MA rated oil. If you're looking for any of these products, you could search on the Scooter West web store for VT, you know, the tune-up section and maintenance section. We have these as group parts. So you're gonna need the O-ring for the drain, 285536 for the O-ring, that's the oil drain. And I recommend original Piaggio oil filter. It's got the nice square O-ring that seals up really well. There are a lot of cheaper oil filters. We also have the one with a nut, which is a pretty high quality one, or the Melosi ones also got that nice square gasket. Pretty inexpensive for the original part. So 82635-PA is the original part number on the Scooter West. Optionally, there's some tools that are gonna make the job much, much easier for you. We have both a scooter size oil pan available and also a specific funnel that works very well with the filler spout, has an offset. The best thing is you buy these as a whole group, so you get all these parts all together. And another important tool is the specific oil filter tool for tightening the OEM style oil filter. So it kind of goes onto the teeth. In a pinch, you could use a channel locks, but I'll warn you, if you damage this, you might make a little crease in it and you can end up with an oil leak. I actually have a scooter here right now that has a punctured oil filter and a completely blown up motor, so you don't really want to damage it. Best to do it with a tool. And some of the standard tools you're going to need some sort of 24mm wrench. It could be a 24mm combination wrench. Alternatively, you could use a shallow 24mm socket or something on a swivel head on a fairly long wrench right here, 3/8 drive wrench. So that's a pretty important set of tools, 24mm, not with the normal Home Depot kit. If you're just gonna buy one tool, you probably just wanna buy just one combination wrench. It can be a cheap one, doesn't need to be a fancy one. So first of all, you can see the scooter is not on the center stand. It's really difficult to do this job with a scooter on the center stand. If you do have the side stand, it is possible, but you gotta be extra careful not to topple the scooter over. Of course, the best scenario is to have a motorcycle lift like this that's clamping the front wheel. There's other ways to improvise, like securing the front wheel. And then you could support the center of the scooter with a scissor jack. And we have the Vespa Motorsport scissor jack here, and it's tool-scooter jack. It's pretty handy, pretty decent quality tool to have, and it's got a nice large platform. Make sure there's nothing you're gonna pinch under here, like I do see a battery tender lead, but kind of get it underneath the belly of that floorboard. You know, Vespa's having all the steel. It's actually easier on a Vespa than it would be a Piaggio product. And I have the front end clamped and secure, and we'll go ahead and pretty much lift the scooter. And I'll tell you, the technicians, they like it pretty high. They put the scooter so high that I would say the rear tire is 9 or 10 inches off the ground. It makes for the job to go easier, it drains the oil faster. You want the scooter to be fairly level so the oil drains. If you're using the side stand, you know, maybe have somebody help hold the scooter. But pretty much another tip is I have the scooters cool, so this it's not the original muffler, but everything's cool right now. The downside of a cool scooter is the oil drains slower. The upside of a hot scooter, like how the technicians got to work on them, is the oil drains quick and they can work much more efficiently and quicker. But here I got a cool scooter. So you take that oil filter wrench. Usually I like to get the oil filter out of the way first, and you can just put it right on the oil filter. And it's what I find sometimes is if the oil filter is on there pretty tight, you may need to smack it on there a little bit, and then you could just shift it off. And I'll show you another tip is, this is the technicians. They've actually cut the handle a little shorter, and the reason being is they like to use a hammer to kind of secure things, and that just makes it a little easier because they could get a hammer in there and shift it off. Alternatively, if you can't get the filter off with the factory tool, you could set up a channel lock or a Nipex style thing. You just gotta, wouldn't recommend ever using this tool to install the filter unless you're very, very careful. But you set that up, and you know, you can see with everything up high in the air, it's much easier. So give it a couple turns. They're small oil filters, so they need to be a little bit tighter than, you know, the big car filters where you could do them hand tight. Is usually good enough. These ones you want to go a little tighter because I have seen people lose them. There's a specific torque for it, but it's not that critical of a torque when you're replacing it. So we're going to go ahead and spin the filter off. I got gloves on. Probably should be wearing safety glasses. And I even have a pig mat. That's like an absorbent oil mat under here, just so if there's any spillage, it kind of catches it if there's any drips. So spin the filter off. And you can let that drain a little bit. So the next step, I'll pull the nut out, but you can kind of see right from where the oil filter is to the back. This is your water pump. If you go draw a line directly below it, that's where your oil drain is. So most home mechanics are going to use something like this, a 24mm wrench, and you could take a soft hammer and give it a little shock. Break it free. Somebody did tighten this a little on the tight side is my thought on it. Shouldn't be that tight. And you know, once it breaks free, make sure you have your oil pan under there. And we'll go ahead and spin the cap off. So pretty straightforward. Obviously with a cool engine, I'm not burning myself on the header. So if you're gonna do it with a hot engine, you obviously take those extra precautions. So we'll go ahead and pull that drain plug out of the way and flip it around. Look, can you see the O-ring still there? We're gonna go ahead and pry that out. I'll probably wipe that out before I reinstall it. But there's also one more little magic part in here that you wanna pull out and clean. So you can take something like this or a needle nose, and in that cavity where that oil drain plug is a strainer. The first thing I look for is make sure there's no metal flakes in there. And don't be alarmed if there's a couple small flakes. There's nothing abnormal. But this looks really, really clean. It's a little bit stained because the scooter does have nearly 20,000 miles on it. And make sure there's no tears in it. And if it looks pretty clean, there's probably no need to over clean it. If I did see some flakes in there, I'd probably put it in the parts cleaner or use something like brake parts cleaner and give it a little clean like that. But it looks pretty nice. I'll just probably sop up the oil, you know, both on this pig mat and also with a disposable paper towel. So you see the oil draining. Another thing I like to do is I usually check the oil before I drain it, the level. You can also measure the quantity that came out of the scooter, because it's a good idea to know how much oil. You really shouldn't let the oil level go below the minimum mark on your dipstick. And I'll show you that later once we get the oil back in the engine. All right, so I wiped out the oil cap, also wiped out the filter with one of these nice blue disposable shop towels. Go ahead and pull the O-ring, just get rid of that. It's a little squared off. There's no sense in reusing it. You know, it could probably reseal fine, but a very inexpensive part. Take the new O-ring and you can just set it right into that well there. Usually it will stay in place just with the residual oil. If it doesn't want to stay in place, just take a real small dab of any type of grease. It doesn't really matter. The only purpose of this grease is just to hold the O-ring in there, and now it's not going to fall out. So the O-ring is going to stay in place. I have my strainer all cleaned out. It's barely to a trickle. When it's just dripping like that, you're not going to even get a teaspoon of oil out of it even overnight. So that's about as far as you need to take it. And this is with a cool motor. They run pretty lightweight oil, so it drains out pretty easily on its own. So I went ahead and tightened that by hand. So what do you do with this? Probably best to put it in a jug, like an old milk jug, and take it to like an auto parts store or any municipality where they take waste oil. Probably not the best thing to ever throw on the ground. Take a paper towel. I like to wipe where the oil filter will go. Make sure there's no remnants of an old gasket or anything in there. So kind of just wipe it out, make it all clean. And before you go any further, you're going to want to tighten that nut. A couple ways to do it. I'm going to actually use a ratchet with a pretty shallow 24 on there. And you don't need to get too tight with this. And see how it's very useful to have this rear tire in the air. And all you got to do is just give it a little bit with your wrist, and that's all it needs. It doesn't need much at all. It's, you know, something like 18 or 20 foot-pounds. It's very, very low torque. Not critical to use a torque wrench. So the original oil filters, they do have this nice protective cap here. You can either take the fresh oil or even something like a little grease, a very small amount of grease, and just put it on that O-ring right there. This, you know, it's kind of a square O-ring. That's kind of the best style oil filters. And go ahead and just spin the oil filter on. If you're familiar with doing a car with a cartridge oil filter, just pretty much the same steps. Spin that filter right on. And right now it's about as tight as I can get it by hand. And it's almost, you know, even as tight as you can get by hand is almost tight enough, as I like to say. And then you could take your oil filter wrench, just push that on there and give it probably another half turn, I would say. And that's about as much as you need. So I could go a little bit further where it would completely smash the O-ring, but right now it's on there very tight with the wrench. Like I said, not recommended to use channel locks to put that on. Now it's time to move on to the other side of the scooter. And another little tip here, if you have the scooter suspended, it's best to check the oil level with it on the center stand. So, well, since it's up in the air and jacked up, I can do that right now. And I heard a little squeal. That would be something else I would address. The center stand could definitely use some grease there. But I'll save that for another video. All right, so fill in the oil. You should know how to do this already, because if you own a scooter, you should be occasionally checking the oil level. And I'll show you how to do that after we fill up the oil. So there's your oil dipstick. That's specific for the model. There's a couple different variations of that dipstick. Sometimes this O-ring starts to get worn. It's probably just best to replace the whole complete dipstick. And a funnel like this makes the job much easier, because if you have like a short funnel, it's kind of in the way. And it's got kind of a tight fit tip in there, and we'll just kind of sit in there just like that. So go ahead and take 1 quart, which is a little bit less than a liter. These motors take about 1 1/4 liter, so about 120, 130, or 1,200 to 1,300 milliliters of oil is about the capacity. And so you need at least 2 bottles to do a fill with a replacement oil filter. And I always recommend changing an oil filter every time. I know some people try to save a buck and leave the old oil filter in there. Not worth it in my eyes, considering how much these small motors rely on the oil. So go ahead and pour the oil in. You see the funnel stays in place. This is a kind of a Scooter West exclusive right here. It's Tool Funnel -HPE. It's a newer version of the funnel, and it's easily identifiable with the blue color. There's of course lots of other types of funnels, big syringes, many ways to put the oil in. There's even spouts that you put on top of oil, and I pretty much got it down to where it's given a drip. I tend to like to let these drip all the way out before I throw them in the trash. Sadly, these aren't really that recyclable. And we'll go ahead and take our second quart, puncture that seal. They do have that nice little graduation on the side, and it has both milliliters and quarts, so I'll probably bring it a little bit below the 3/4 mark for the quarts, because a lot of oil in the United States is sold by the quart, which is very close to a liter, but not quite. So it's a little above. And of course, in a shop environment, I have calibrated metering devices that pump oil from a 55-gallon drum. So we get high volume, quick, efficient oil changes here for the service department. But that's obviously outside the realm of a do-it-yourself mechanic here. So let the funnel kind of trickle its last oil supply into the engine here. And I'm pretty confident I put the right amount of oil in there. Go ahead and thread that dipstick back in, and I'll just do it right till it stops. All right, so now we're ready to start the scooter. So there's one thing I'm looking at. There's an oil indicator. It looks like a little oil spout. It's a nice thing about most of the modern Vespas that are over 125 cc. They have high pressure oil systems. They have an oil pressure switch. Turn the ignition on, and pull a brake and start the scooter, of course with the dipstick installed. And it's going to take a moment before it goes out. And there it is. And you can oftentimes hear the motor note change just ever so slightly when that oil light goes out, when it builds up pressure. That's a good thing. Usually you shouldn't have any issues if the correct quantity of oil. So we're going to go back to the dipstick and check the level, and pretty much you're done with the oil change. All right, so last we're going to be checking the oil level. So pretty simple on these 2019 and earlier GTSs. If you own a later one, you know it's not exactly easy. So unthread the dipstick. Engine's cold, it's up on the center stand, it's on a level surface. So that's a pretty important formula when you're checking the oil level. So I pulled it out, you can see the crosshatch. That's your high mark, is that little band there, and the low mark is right there. And the way you check a Vespa oil levels, thread it in right until it seats, and then spin it back out. And there you go, look at that. It's nearly to the top, so that's perfect. So pretty much used 1 and a little bit more than 1/4 bottle of this castor oil, and that brought it right up to the correct level with a brand new oil filter. And then make sure that's tight. Just hand tight, don't put a tool on it. O-ring kind of seals it up. And there you go. You're set for the next 3,000 miles. I mean, you could probably push it 6,000 miles like the factory recommendation is, but come on, these are little motors, they work pretty hard. They deliver a lot of performance for nearly 300 cc's, highway speeds. So they rely pretty heavily on that motor oil. So thanks for watching. If you're looking for any of these items, find them on scooterwest.com. We'll see you on the next one, and look out for more videos coming.